There's a recipe that almost no one writes down. It's not fancy. There's no butter, no spices, sometimes no meat at all, just water, salt, maybe an onion if you're lucky. But this recipe, it kept people alive. In 1915, Armenian families arrived in America with almost nothing. Some carried a single pot, a few handfuls of grain, and memories of a kitchen that no longer existed. They didn't have cookbooks. They didn't have time to learn English. They just had each other, and food that could stretch, food that could heal, food that whispered, "You're going to make it." Today we're looking at 30 recipes that helped Armenian immigrant families start over. Some of these dishes taste like hope. Some taste like survival. And a few, well, they taste like home, even when home was gone. Let's start with the simplest one, the one that fed more people than any other. 1. Plain bulgur and onion pilaf. Bulgur is wheat that's been cracked, parboiled, and dried. It's ancient, it's simple, and it can last for years if you store it right. When Armenian families fled in 1915, many carried bulgur in cloth bags tied to their bodies. Some sewed it into the linings of their coats, because they knew something crucial. As long as you had bulgur, you had food. As long as you had food, you had a chance. When they arrived in America, this was the first meal most families made. Not because it was fancy, not because it reminded them of celebrations back home, but because it was fast, filling, and it worked. You'd boil water in whatever pot you had. Sometimes it was a battered kettle. Sometimes it was a tin can. You'd add the bulgur and watch it swell as it absorbed the water. Then, if you were lucky enough to have an onion, you'd chop it fine and stir it in. The onion gave the pilaf sweetness. It gave it life. It made the bulgur taste like something worth eating instead of just something to fill your stomach. If you had salt, you added a pinch. If you had a tiny bit of oil or butter, you'd drizzle it on top and watch it melt into the grains. But most days, there was no oil, no butter, just bulgur, onion, and water. Mothers served this in chipped bowls to children who were too hungry to complain. Fathers ate it standing up before leaving for factory shifts that started before dawn. Grandmothers ate it slowly, remembering the elaborate pilafs they used to make with lamb, pine nuts, and dried fruits. But nobody said it wasn't enough, because in those early days, enough meant you had something warm in your belly. Enough meant you'd survive another day. Enough meant your family was still together. This pilaf became the foundation, the starting point, the meal that said, "We're going to make it." 2. Ash soup. The name sounds strange. Ash soup. But the name tells you everything you need to know about what life was like. This soup got its name because it was made when everything else was gone, when the meat was gone, when the vegetables were gone, when all you had left were grains and whatever wild herbs you could find growing in empty lots or along railroad tracks. It was called ash soup because it looked gray, pale, like the color of ash, like the color of survival. You'd start with water. Sometimes it was clean water from a pump. Sometimes it was water you had to boil twice to make sure it was safe. You'd add whatever grain you had, cracked wheat, barley, sometimes just bulgur. You'd let it simmer until the grains started to break down and thicken the water. Then came the herbs. If you were in the city, you'd forage for dandelion greens, wild sorrel, or chickweed. Things that grew in cracks in the sidewalk. Things that nobody else wanted. If you were near the docks, you might find purslane or lamb's quarters growing near the water. You'd wash the herbs carefully, chop them rough, throw them into the pot. Let everything cook together until the broth tasted like something. It wasn't rich, it wasn't savory like a meat broth, but it was warm, and it was food. Sometimes women would add a splash of vinegar if they had it. The acid brightened the flavor, made it taste less flat, less gray. This soup was eaten from shared bowls in communal kitchens, in church basements where refugee families gathered, in cramped apartments where 3 families lived in spaces meant for 1. Nobody pretended it was delicious, but nobody complained either. because ash soup meant you were still here, still fighting, still feeding your children, and that was worth more than flavor. 3. Lentils stewed with garlic and vinegar. Lentils saved lives. That's not an exaggeration. That's history. When Armenian families arrived in America, they quickly learned which foods were cheap enough to buy on factory wages. Lentils were at the top of the list. A pound of lentils cost almost nothing, and that pound could feed a family for days. Lentils didn't need soaking like beans. They cooked fast. They didn't need much fuel, and they filled you up in a way that lasted. The protein in lentils gave people energy, strength, the ability to work long hours in factories, textile mills, and on construction sites. Here's how it worked. You'd rinse the lentils in cold water, checking for small stones. Then you'd put them in a pot with fresh water. While they cooked, you'd peel and smash a few cloves of garlic. The smell of garlic in those tenement hallways became the smell of home, of survival, of making do. When the lentils were soft, you'd stir in the garlic. Then came the secret, a good splash of vinegar. Not fancy wine vinegar, just plain white vinegar from the corner store. The vinegar cut through the earthiness of the lentils. It gave the stew a sharp, bright kick that woke up your mouth, made you feel alive. Some families added a pinch of dried mint if they had it. Others stirred in a spoonful of tomato paste when tomatoes were in season and cheap. But most days it was just lentils, garlic, vinegar, and salt. Mothers ladled this stew into bowls and served it with whatever bread they had. Kids ate it without complaint because they knew it was good food. Real food. Food that would help them grow strong. This wasn't fancy cuisine, but it was powerful, and in those early immigrant kitchens, power mattered more than presentation. 4. Flat pan bread, no yeast, no oven. Most Armenian immigrant families didn't have ovens. The tenement apartments they lived in had tiny kitchens with 1 or 2 burners, maybe a hot plate. No space for baking, but people needed bread. Bread was life. Bread made everything else feel like a real meal. So they adapted. They created a bread that didn't need yeast, didn't need rising time, didn't need an oven, just flour, water, salt, and heat. You'd mix flour with water and a pinch of salt until you had a firm dough. Then you'd knead it just enough to bring it together, divide it into small pieces, roll each piece thin with a bottle or a wooden dowel. Whatever you had that was round and smooth. Then came the magic. You'd heat a cast-iron skillet or a flat metal sheet until it was smoking hot. Slap the dough onto the surface. Watch it bubble and blister. Flip it. Let the other side cook. The bread puffed up. It charred in spots. It smelled like every village bakery back home, like every hearth fire, like memory made solid. This bread didn't last long. It got tough and chewy by the next day. But that was okay, because it was never meant to last. It was meant to be torn into pieces while still warm, meant to be used to scoop up stew or wrap around a bit of cheese or a few olives if you were lucky. Children would hover near the stove, waiting for the first piece to come off the heat. Mothers would hand them the edges, still warm, still soft, and for a moment in a crowded kitchen thousands of miles from home, it felt like everything might be okay. This bread was proof that you didn't need fancy equipment to make something essential. You just needed flour, water, and the knowledge passed down through generations of women who knew how to feed their families no matter what. 5. Boiled chickpeas with salt and lemon. Before they were survival food, chickpeas were celebration food, street food, the kind of thing you'd buy from a vendor on a warm evening and eat while walking through the market. Back in Armenia, street vendors would roast chickpeas in big pans over charcoal, scoop them into paper cones, sprinkle them with salt and a squeeze of lemon. People would eat them hot, crunching through the skins, laughing with friends. In America, immigrant families turned chickpeas into something different, something more practical. They became portable protein, lunch for factory workers, snacks for children, food you could make once and eat all week. Here's how it worked. You'd soak dried chickpeas overnight in cold water, In the morning, you'd drain them and put them in a pot with fresh water. Boil them until they were soft, but not mushy. The apartment would fill with a warm, nutty smell that somehow made everything feel less bleak. When the chickpeas were done, you'd drain them and let them cool. Then you'd pack them into jars or cloth bags. Workers carried them in their coat pockets. Mothers packed them for children's lunches. They could sit at room temperature all day without spoiling. When you were ready to eat, you'd pour a handful into your palm, sprinkle a little salt, squeeze a bit of lemon if you had it, and you'd eat them one by one, feeling each one fill your stomach, give you energy, help you keep going. Chickpeas didn't taste like luxury, but they tasted like something solid, something real, something you could count on. And in those early years, when nothing else felt certain, that kind of reliability was worth more than gold. 6. Egg and onion skillet scramble. 2 eggs, 8 people. How do you make it work? This was the math of immigrant kitchens, the constant calculation of how to stretch what little you had into something that would feed everyone at the table. The answer was onions. Always onions. Onions were cheap, cheaper than eggs, cheaper than meat, cheaper than almost everything else, and onions had magic in them. When you cooked them slow, they turned sweet, they turned soft. They turned into something that felt like abundance, even when there wasn't any. Here's what mothers did. They'd heat a small skillet with just enough oil to coat the bottom. Then they'd add sliced onions. Lots of onions, maybe 2 or 3 whole onions for those 2 precious eggs. They'd cook the onions slow over low heat, no rushing. The onions would release their water, soften, start to turn golden at the edges. The smell would drift through the apartment, and children would wander into the kitchen, drawn by the promise of something good. When the onions were sweet and soft, the eggs would go in. 2 eggs cracked and beaten with a splash of water to stretch them further, scrambled into the onions, stirred until everything was cooked through. The result was a skillet full of golden scrambled eggs and onions. It looked like plenty. It felt like plenty. Even though most of what you were eating was onion, mothers would divide it carefully, making sure everyone got an equal portion, making sure no one felt cheated. The eggs gave the dish protein and richness. The onions gave it volume and sweetness. Together, they made a meal that kept people going. This scramble showed up at breakfast before work, at dinner when money was tightest, at midnight when someone came home from a late shift still hungry. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, it was filling, and it proved that with a little creativity you could make 2 eggs feed a family. 7. Cabbage and bulgur pot stew. Cabbage doesn't get the respect it deserves. It's humble, it's cheap, and it can sit in a cold cellar for months without spoiling. For immigrant families, cabbage was a lifeline, especially in winter when fresh vegetables were expensive or impossible to find. A head of cabbage cost pennies, and 1 head could make enough stew to feed a family for 2 days, maybe 3 if you stretched it. The process was simple. You'd chop the cabbage thick, big chunks that would hold up during cooking. You'd put them in a heavy pot with bulgur and enough water to cover everything. Then you'd let it simmer. As the cabbage cooked, it released its sweetness into the water. The bulgur absorbed that sweet liquid and swelled up, turning tender and flavorful. The cabbage softened but didn't fall apart, and slowly the pot transformed into something more than the sum of its parts. If you had a bit of oil, you'd add a spoonful. It would pool on the surface and make everything taste richer. If you had an onion, you'd dice it and throw it in. If you had tomato paste, you'd stir in a spoonful for color and depth. But most days it was just cabbage, bulgur, water, and salt. Nothing else. This stew was thick, hearty, the kind of food that stuck to your ribs and kept you warm from the inside out. Fathers ate bowls of this before heading to construction sites in freezing weather. Mothers ate it standing at the stove, too tired to sit. Children ate it without complaint because they knew it was good food. Honest food. The leftovers got even better the next day. The flavors melded. The bulgur absorbed more liquid, and the stew became denser, more filling, more satisfying. This wasn't the kind of food you'd serve to guests, but it was the kind of food that kept families alive through brutal winters in an unfamiliar country. 8. Simple yogurt and wheat bowl. This dish is older than countries, older than borders. It goes back thousands of years to a time when shepherds carried yogurt and grain as they moved across mountains. Armenian families brought this knowledge with them to America. The knowledge that yogurt and wheat together made a complete meal, cooling, filling, easy to digest. Making yogurt became a ritual in immigrant households. Women would heat milk slowly, carefully, watching it so it didn't scorch. When it reached the right temperature, they'd add a spoonful of yogurt from the last batch. Culture from culture, generation to generation. Then they'd wrap the pot in towels and tuck it somewhere warm overnight. By morning, the milk had transformed into thick, tangy yogurt. Some families made it every few days, others made big batches once a week. The yogurt would keep in a cool place for days, providing a constant source of protein and probiotics that helped settle upset stomachs from unfamiliar foods and stressful lives. To make the bowl, you'd cook wheat or bulgur until it was tender. Let it cool. Then mix it with yogurt, cold or room temperature, a pinch of salt to balance the tang. That was it. Simple, ancient, perfect. This bowl showed up everywhere, at breakfast before work, at lunch in factory break rooms, at dinner when it was too hot to cook anything else. In summer, when tenement apartments turned into ovens, this cold bowl was the only meal anyone wanted. Children loved it because it was smooth and tangy. Adults loved it because it was fast and didn't require heat. Elderly people loved it because it was gentle on stomachs that couldn't handle heavy or spicy foods anymore. This bowl represented something important. It represented the knowledge that survived, the traditions that couldn't be taken away, the food wisdom that came across oceans and through hardships and still worked in a new country with new challenges. You could take away homes, you could take away land, but you couldn't take away the knowledge of how to feed your family with simple ingredients that sustained life. 9. Stuffed grape leaves with rice. Only. In the old country, stuffed grape leaves were special occasion food, wedding food, holiday food. You'd fill them with rice, minced lamb, pine nuts, currants, and warm spices. Roll them carefully, simmer them in rich broth. In America, immigrant families made them different, simpler, without the lamb, without the pine nuts, without most of the spices, just rice, onions, maybe a little dill or parsley if someone had a small pot growing on the fire escape. Salt, lemon juice, that was all. But the process was the same, and that mattered. Mothers and daughters would sit together at the kitchen table with a bowl of rice filling and a stack of grape leaves. Some families brought preserved grape leaves with them from Armenia. Others learned to buy jarred leaves from Greek or Turkish shops in the city. Rolling the leaves became meditation. You'd place a leaf flat, shiny side down. Put a small spoonful of rice in the center, fold the sides in, roll it tight, place it seam side down in the pot. Grandmothers taught granddaughters the right way to roll, not too tight or the rice wouldn't have room to expand, not too loose or they'd fall apart during cooking, just right. The kitchen would go quiet except for the sound of leaves being folded, women working together, hands moving in the same patterns their mothers' hands had moved, and their grandmothers' hands before that. When the pot was full of tightly rolled leaves, you'd add water and lemon juice. Place a plate on top to weigh them down. Simmer them until the rice was cooked and the leaves were tender. These meatless grape leaves showed up at church gatherings, at celebrations when there was something to celebrate, at Sunday dinners when families could take time to make something that required care and attention. They weren't as rich as the ones from the old country, but they tasted like memory, like tradition, like the things that survived even when everything else was lost. 10. Fried bread pieces with garlic yogurt. In immigrant kitchens, nothing was wasted, nothing, because waste was a luxury nobody could afford. Stale bread wasn't garbage. It was the beginning of another meal, another way to fill hungry stomachs. Here's what happened to bread that got hard. Mothers would tear it into rough chunks, not too big, not too small, about the size of a walnut. Then they'd heat a skillet with just enough oil to coat the bottom, just enough to fry, but not so much that it was wasteful. The bread would go in, the pieces would sizzle, turn golden, get crispy on the outside while staying a little soft on the inside. The oil would soak in just enough to make them taste rich. While the bread fried, someone would prepare the yogurt, thick yogurt whisked smooth with crushed garlic, raw garlic, sharp and pungent, the kind that cleared your sinuses and made your eyes water. A pinch of salt to balance everything. When the bread was golden and crispy, you'd pile it in a bowl, pour the garlic yogurt over top. Or sometimes you'd serve the yogurt on the side for dipping. The hot, crispy bread would soften slightly as it touched the cool yogurt. The garlic would hit your tongue, the tang of the yogurt would cut through the oiliness of the fried bread, and suddenly something that was about to be thrown away became something people wanted seconds of. This dish showed up at odd hours. At lunch, when there was nothing else. At dinner, when the paycheck was still days away. At midnight, when someone came home from a double shift, too hungry to sleep. Children would fight over the crispiest pieces. Adults would soak the softer pieces in extra yogurt. Everyone would eat slowly, making it last, because the next meal might not come for hours. This recipe taught a lesson that went beyond food. It taught that value isn't about what something cost originally. It's about what you can create with what you have. It's about resourcefulness, creativity, refusing to give up. In those kitchens, stale bread and garlic became dignity. 11. Cracked wheat porridge with butter drops. This was breakfast when breakfast was all you could afford to think about. When you couldn't plan for lunch or dinner because you didn't know if there would be any, when you had to focus on right now, this moment, this meal. Cracked wheat was cheap, cheaper than oats, cheaper than rice, and it cooked into a thick filling porridge that would keep you going for hours. The process was simple. You'd boil water, add the cracked wheat, stir it, watch it as it absorbed the water and swelled up. The grains would soften, the mixture would thicken, and after about 15 minutes you'd have a pot of hot porridge. On its own, cracked wheat porridge was bland, gray, the kind of food you ate because you had to, not because you wanted to. But if you had even the smallest amount of butter, everything changed. A tiny pat of butter dropped on top of a bowl of hot porridge. You'd watch it melt, watch it spread, watch it turn into golden pools that soaked into the grains. That butter made the porridge taste like something worth eating. It gave it richness, smoothness. It coated your mouth and made you feel satisfied instead of just full. Children would eat their porridge slowly on cold mornings, warming their hands on the bowls. Workers would eat it quickly before dawn shifts, spooning it down while it was still hot enough to burn. Mothers would eat it standing at the stove, watching their children eat, making sure everyone else had enough before taking their own portion. This porridge didn't have sugar. It didn't have milk unless there was extra money that week. It didn't have dried fruit or nuts or any of the things that make breakfast feel special. But it had warmth, it had sustenance, and it had the promise that today, at least for this morning, everyone would have something in their stomachs. That promise mattered, because some mornings that promise was the only thing that got people out of bed and ready to face another day of backbreaking work in a country that didn't always welcome them. 12. Lentil patties, pan-seared in oil. There comes a moment in every immigrant family's journey when survival isn't enough anymore, when you need something more than just food that fills you up. You need food that makes you feel human again, food that requires care, attention, love. Lentil patties were that moment for many Armenian families. They marked a shift from pure survival to something approaching normal life. Making these patties took time. You couldn't rush them. First, you'd cook lentils until they were very soft. Then you'd drain them and mash them, not smooth like hummus, chunky, with texture. While the lentils cooled, you'd saute onions and garlic until they were soft and golden. The smell would fill the apartment, and neighbors would wonder what you were making. You'd mix the onions and garlic into the mashed lentils. Add some bulgur to help everything bind together. Season with salt and whatever spices you had. Cumin if you were lucky, black pepper if you weren't. Then came the shaping. You'd scoop out portions and form them into patties with your hands, flattening them between your palms, making them all the same size so they'd cook evenly. This part was important. It showed you cared about the result, that you weren't just throwing food together. The patties would get pan-seared in hot oil. You'd hear them sizzle as they hit the pan. Watch them turn golden brown on the bottom. Flip them carefully so they didn't fall apart. Let the other side get crispy, too. The result was something special, crispy on the outside, soft and savory on the inside, something you could be proud to serve, something that tasted like effort and care. These patties showed up on Sundays, on birthdays, on days when someone got a promotion or a raise, or simply made it through another hard week. They showed up when families wanted to celebrate something, even if that something was just still being together. Children would ask for them by name. Adults would eat them slowly, savoring every bite. Because these patties represented progress. They represented the moment when food became more than fuel, when it became joy again. 13. Onion and tomato relish with bread. Sometimes, in the middle of survival, you need something that wakes you up, something sharp, something fresh, something that reminds you that food can be more than just filling. This relish was that wake-up call. Simple, bright, alive. You'd dice onions fine, red onions if you could find them because they were sweeter and less harsh. Yellow onions if that's what you had. You'd chop tomatoes when they were in season and cheap. In summer, when tomatoes were everywhere and vendors sold them by the crate for almost nothing, families would make this relish every day. The onions and tomatoes would go in a bowl together. A good squeeze of lemon juice, a pinch of salt, maybe a little dried mint if someone had a jar left over from the old country. You'd mix everything together and let it sit for a few minutes. The salt would draw moisture from the tomatoes. The lemon would mellow the sharpness of the onions. Everything would meld together into something more than its parts. This relish got piled on bread, on flatbread, on crackers, on anything that could hold it. The juices would soak into the bread. The fresh vegetables would crunch between your teeth. The lemon and salt would make your mouth water. It was the kind of food that made people smile. That made conversation happen. That turned a basic meal into something that felt a little special. Workers would eat this for lunch. Mothers would make it for dinner alongside something heavier. Children would sneak bites of it while it was being prepared, getting their fingers yelled at, but not really caring because it tasted so good. This relish did something important. It reminded people that even when you don't have much, you can still create flavor, brightness, joy. You can still make food that tastes like life instead of just like survival. And in those years, when survival was the daily challenge, that reminder mattered more than anyone could say. 14. Stewed greens with lemon and oil. There's a kind of hunger that goes beyond the stomach. It's the hunger for something fresh, something green, something that reminds you that you're still alive and that your body needs more than just starches and proteins. Immigrant families felt this hunger in winter. In the cold months when fresh vegetables were expensive or impossible to find, when the body started craving vitamins it wasn't getting. So they foraged, they searched. They found green things growing in places nobody else looked. Dandelion greens pushing through cracks in sidewalks, wild chicory in empty lots, purslane near railroad tracks, lamb's quarters behind warehouses. These weren't the cultivated greens from grocery stores. These were tough greens, bitter greens, greens that needed serious cooking to become edible. Here's what women did with them. They'd wash the greens carefully, multiple times, because city greens came with city dirt. Then they'd chop them rough and put them in a pot with water, boil them until they were tender. The water would turn dark green, almost black. When the greens were soft, they'd drain them, press out the excess water, put them in a serving bowl. Then came the important part: a good squeeze of lemon juice, a drizzle of oil, salt. The lemon brightened the bitter greens, made them taste less harsh. The oil coated them and made them feel richer. The salt balanced everything. These stewed greens appeared next to every meal, next to bread, next to bulgur, next to lentils. They were the side dish that made everything else feel more complete, more balanced, more like real food instead of just fuel. Mothers would insist that children eat their greens, not because they tasted good, but because bodies needed them, because in a new country where everything was hard, you couldn't afford to get sick from not eating vegetables. Some children would pinch their noses and swallow the greens quickly. Others would mix them with bread to make them easier to eat. Adults would eat them without complaint, because they remembered what it felt like to go weeks without anything fresh. These greens represented something important. They represented resourcefulness, the ability to find food where others saw only weeds, the knowledge of which wild plants were safe and which weren't, the survival skills that came across oceans and still worked in cities. 15. Roasted eggplant mashed with salt. There are foods that taste like memory, foods so connected to a specific place and time that one bite can transport you across years and oceans. For many Armenian families, roasted eggplant was that food. The smell of eggplant charring over a flame could stop a conversation, could make a grandmother cry, could bring back summer nights in villages that no longer existed. But in America, in tiny tenement kitchens, there weren't outdoor fires, no charcoal grills, just gas burners on old stoves. So families adapted. They'd place an eggplant directly on the burner, turn the flame up high, let the eggplant char and blister, turn it carefully with tongs so all sides got blackened. The skin would crack and split, the flesh inside would steam and soften. Smoke would fill the kitchen. The smell would drift into the hallway. Neighbors would know someone was making eggplant. When the eggplant was completely charred, you'd let it cool just enough to handle. Then you'd peel away the blackened skin. The flesh underneath would be pale and soft, smoky and sweet. You'd put that soft flesh in a bowl and mash it. Roughly, not smooth. You wanted texture, pieces. Then you'd add salt. Just salt. Nothing else. The result tasted like smoke and summer, like memory made edible. Some families would add a tiny bit of lemon juice. Others would swirl in a spoonful of yogurt, but purists insisted on just salt, because that simple preparation let the smokiness shine through. This mashed eggplant got spread on bread, eaten with a spoon, served alongside other dishes. It was simple, but it was powerful, because it tasted exactly like something from home. And in a country where almost nothing felt familiar, that taste was precious beyond measure. Children who had never seen Armenia would eat this and suddenly understand something about their parents, about where they came from, about what they'd lost. Adults would eat it and remember. Gardens, villages, people, places that existed now only in memory and in the taste of charred eggplant. 16. Bean and bulgur mash. There are foods designed for one purpose: to keep people working, to provide enough energy and protein that someone can labor for 12 hours without collapsing, to turn human bodies into engines that can survive brutal physical work. Bean and bulgur mash was that food. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't elegant, but it was powerful, dense, packed with calories and protein. You'd cook dried beans until they were soft. White beans, navy beans, whatever was cheapest that week. At the same time, you'd cook bulgur. When both were tender, you'd combine them in a large bowl and mash them together. Not smooth, chunky, substantial. The result looked like thick paste, gray-brown, unappealing to look at. But that didn't matter because this food wasn't about appearance. It was about survival. Men would eat bowls of this before shifts at factories, steel mills, construction sites. They'd eat it cold because there wasn't time to heat it up during lunch breaks. They'd eat it with their hands sometimes, forming it into balls, because there weren't always utensils available. This mash stuck to your ribs. It gave you sustained energy that lasted for hours. It kept muscles working. It kept bodies moving even when exhaustion set in. Fathers would come home after 16-hour shifts, too tired to speak, and eat more of this mash before collapsing into sleep. Mothers would pack it for sons who were working to help support the family, young men who should have been in school but instead were hauling bricks or shoveling coal. This food represented something difficult to talk about. It represented the grinding labor that built America, the backbreaking work that immigrants did in conditions that would horrify modern workers, the sacrifice of bodies and health so that families could survive and maybe, eventually, thrive. Nobody celebrated bean and bulgur mash. Nobody called it delicious. But everybody respected it, because everyone understood what it represented and why it mattered. 17. Simple rice with toasted vermicelli. There comes a point in every immigrant story when the old world and the new world start to blend, when traditional foods meet new ingredients, when recipes begin to evolve. Rice with toasted vermicelli was one of those blending moments for Armenian families. Rice they knew. Rice was traditional, but vermicelli, those thin pasta noodles, those were new. Those came from American grocery stores, from Italian markets, from this new country with its new ingredients. The process was simple but transformative. You'd break vermicelli noodles into small pieces, toast them in a little butter or oil until they turned golden brown. The noodles would smell nutty and sweet. Then you'd add the rice and toast it with the vermicelli. Finally, you'd add water and cook everything together. The toasted vermicelli gave the rice a nutty flavor, a slight crunch, a golden color that made plain rice look like something special. It was still simple, still cheap. But it felt like progress, like adaptation, like figuring out how to belong in this new place while still remembering where you came from. This rice started showing up at Sunday dinners, at gatherings, at times when families wanted something that felt a little special but wasn't expensive. Children preferred it to plain rice. The noodles made it more interesting, more fun to eat. Mothers would make big pots of it when families came together. It paired well with stews, with meat when there was meat, with vegetables, with everything. It became a bridge food, something that felt both familiar and new at the same time. This dish represented something hopeful. It represented the idea that immigrant families didn't have to choose between their old culture and their new country. They could blend them, take the best of both worlds, create something that honored where they came from while embracing where they were. And that blending, that adaptation, that was the beginning of becoming American while still being Armenian. 18. Garlic broth with bread soaked in. When someone got sick in an immigrant family, there were no doctors. Doctors cost money, money that had to go to rent, food, survival. So families relied on old remedies, traditional cures, foods that healed. Garlic broth was medicine, real medicine. The kind grandmothers had been making for generations, the kind that actually worked. When a child came down with fever, or a father developed a cough from working in freezing temperatures, or a mother felt weakness spreading through her body, someone would make garlic broth. The process was simple. Crush several cloves of garlic, not just pressed. Crushed hard so the juices flowed. Boil water. Add the crushed garlic. Let it steep like tea. The result was a clear broth that smelled intense, sharp, the kind of smell that cleared congestion just from breathing it in. You'd tear bread into pieces and soak them in the hot garlic broth until they were soft. Then you'd eat it while it was still steaming. Sip the broth between bites of soggy bread. It wasn't delicious. The garlic was strong enough to burn. Your eyes would water, your throat would feel hot. But within hours, you'd feel better. The fever would break, the cough would loosen, the weakness would start to lift. This broth represented love in its purest form. When a grandmother stayed up all night, making sure a sick grandchild drank enough garlic broth. When a mother sacrificed sleep to tend to a sick husband who couldn't afford to miss work. When a neighbor brought over a pot of steaming broth because she heard someone was unwell. In those crowded apartments where illness spread quickly, garlic broth was the first line of defense. It was preventative medicine, it was cure, it was comfort, all in one simple preparation. The knowledge of how to make it passed from generation to generation. Not written down, just shown, demonstrated. Mothers teaching daughters the right ratio of garlic to water, how long to steep it, how hot it should be, how much to give to children versus adults. This wasn't folklore, this was survival medicine that worked. 19. Sun-dried fruit and nut hand mix. Not all survival food requires cooking. Some foods are ready, portable, waiting to provide energy exactly when you need it. Sun-dried fruit and nut mix was that kind of food. Energy you could carry in your pocket. Calories that would last all day in a factory or on a construction site. Food that wouldn't spoil in the heat. That could be divided and shared. That could save you when you had no time to stop for a real meal. Families would prepare this mix in batches. Dried apricots cut into strips, raisins, walnuts broken into pieces, sometimes dried figs if they were on sale, almonds if there was extra money, all mixed together in cloth bags or jars. The fruit provided quick sugar, immediate energy. The nuts provided fat and protein, sustained energy that lasted. Together, they were a complete portable meal, not elegant, not exciting, but absolutely reliable. Workers carried these bags to factories. Fathers would eat handfuls during short breaks. Construction workers would share them at job sites. Children would pack them for school lunches. The mix became the food of movement, of labor, of long days when stopping wasn't an option. There was something ancient about this food. Travelers had carried dried fruit and nuts for thousands of years, across deserts, through mountains, on ships. It was food that transcended culture and nationality, food that simply worked. For immigrant families, this mix connected them to that ancient tradition of survival. It reminded them that their ancestors had traveled with similar foods, had survived on similar preparations, that they were part of a long line of people who knew how to endure, how to keep moving, how to make it through hard times. Every handful was proof that you could go on, that energy was available, that survival was possible. Simple as that. 20. Pan-steamed dumpling dough. There are times when even basic ingredients become scarce. When the filling for dumplings, the good stuff, the meat or cheese or vegetables, is impossible to afford, but people still need to eat, families still need to be fed, so you make dumplings anyway, just the dough. Nothing inside, just flour, water, salt, formed into dough, rolled out, cut into squares or circles, then steamed in a pan with a little water and a tight lid. These weren't the dumplings anyone wanted to make. They were the dumplings you made when you had no other choice, when the pantry was almost empty, but you still had flour, when you needed to put something, anything, in your children's stomachs. The dough would steam and puff up slightly, turn soft and chewy. The texture was satisfying in its own way, substantial, something you could bite into, something that filled your mouth. Families would eat these plain dumplings with whatever they had. A little yogurt, a drizzle of oil, salt, sometimes just water if there was nothing else. Children who complained at first learned quickly that complaining didn't produce better food. They learned to eat what was there, to be grateful for full stomachs even when the meal was bland. These dumplings taught hard lessons about scarcity, about making do, about the difference between what you want and what you need. Adults would eat them and remember why they came to America, why they endured the crossing, why they worked such brutal hours, so that someday, maybe, they could fill those dumplings with something, so their children could grow up knowing filled dumplings, so the next generation wouldn't have to eat dough and pretend it was enough. But for now, in those early years, plain dumplings were what there was, and you ate them, and you survived another day. 21. Cold yogurt soup with crushed wheat. Summer in a tenement apartment was its own kind of hell. No air conditioning existed, no fans, windows that barely opened, buildings that trapped heat like ovens, temperatures inside that climbed higher than outside, nights that brought no relief, just thick, suffocating air that made breathing feel like work. In that heat, cooking became torture. Turning on a stove meant making an already unbearable situation worse. But families still needed to eat. Children still got hungry. Work still demanded energy. So immigrant families turned to foods that required no heat, foods that cooled instead of warmed, foods that made survival possible even in crushing heat. Cold yogurt soup was summer survival. You'd thin yogurt with cold water, lots of water to make it soupy instead of thick. Add crushed wheat that had been cooked earlier before the heat became unbearable. Stir in salt, maybe crushed dried mint if you had it. The result was pale and cooling, refreshing in a way that hot food could never be. The yogurt's tang woke up your taste buds. The wheat provided substance. The cold temperature brought relief. Families would eat this soup straight from the pot or bowl. No heating, no serving dishes, just taking turns with spoons. The soup would calm overheated bodies, settle restless stomachs, provide calories without making anyone feel worse. Children would drink it eagerly because it was one of the few things that felt good in the heat. This soup represented adaptation, the ability to change cooking methods based on circumstances, to find solutions when normal approaches didn't work, to survive not just poverty, but also the physical challenges of living in crowded urban housing that wasn't designed for human comfort. Every bowl was a small victory against the heat. 22 slow-baked apples with clove. There comes a moment when survival isn't enough anymore, when you need something that feels like celebration, like hope, like maybe things are getting better. Slow-baked apples with clove was that moment for many families. Not everyday food, not survival food, but special occasion food. The food you made when there was finally a little sugar, when someone had a birthday, when a holiday came, when you wanted to remind yourself that life could still hold sweetness. The preparation was simple, but required resources that weren't always available. You'd core apples, fill the center with a tiny bit of sugar, and push a single whole clove into the flesh. Bake them slowly until they were soft. The sugar would melt and mingle with the apple's natural juices. The clove would release its warm, spicy aroma. The whole apartment would fill with a smell that felt like comfort, like home, like everything might be okay. Children would gather in the kitchen, drawn by the smell. They'd wait impatiently for the apples to finish baking. Adults would smile at each other, remembering better times, easier times, times when baked apples were ordinary instead of extraordinary. When the apples were finally ready, they'd be served warm, eaten slowly, savored, every bite appreciated in a way that people who've never known scarcity can't fully understand. These apples marked progress. They appeared when families had moved beyond bare survival into something approaching stability, when there was enough money not just for food, but for a little sugar, when there was time and fuel to run an oven for an hour just to make something nice. They were proof that the sacrifices were working, that the brutal labor was leading somewhere, that maybe, eventually, life would include sweetness again. 23. Split pea and onion stew. Community matters when you're rebuilding a life, when you're far from home, when everything is unfamiliar and hard. Immigrant families understood this instinctively. They gathered, they shared, they created spaces where being together made survival possible. Church basements became gathering places, community halls, anywhere people could come together and remember they weren't alone. And in those spaces, there was always food, shared food, communal food, food that no single family could make alone, but together they could create in abundance. Split pea and onion stew was that communal food, made in huge pots, pots big enough to feed 50 people, 100 people, however many showed up. The process was simple but required coordination. Someone would bring split peas, someone else would bring onions, others would contribute salt, oil, whatever they had. Women would work together, chopping onions, sorting peas, tending the massive pots that simmered for hours. The split peas would break down into a thick, hearty stew. The onions would sweeten and disappear into the base. Everything would meld together into something nourishing and substantial. People would line up with bowls. Everyone got the same portion. No one got more or less. There was no judgment about who was working or who was struggling, who had money or who didn't. Everyone was welcome. Everyone ate. This stew appeared at weddings that were more about community than celebration, at funerals where grief needed to be fed, at Sunday gatherings where people came together simply to remember their shared culture. It wasn't fancy, but it fed people. It brought them together. It reminded them that they were part of something larger than their individual struggles, that they had each other. And in those early immigrant years, having each other was sometimes the only thing that made survival possible. 24 oil-fried dough strips. Celebration doesn't require abundance. It requires joy, the decision to mark a moment, to say that despite everything, there's something worth celebrating. Oil-fried dough strips were celebration food made from almost nothing, just flour, water, salt, formed into dough, rolled thin, cut into strips, fried in hot oil. They'd puff up, turn golden, get crispy and light. The smell of frying dough would announce to everyone that something special was happening. These strips appeared at baptisms, at first birthdays, at moments when families decided that survival wasn't enough, that they needed to mark joy, even in the middle of hardship. Children would dance around the kitchen, waiting for the first strips to come out of the oil. Adults would eat them warm, remembering celebrations from the old country. Remembering what it felt like to celebrate without the weight of survival pressing down on every moment. The strips were slightly sweet if there was sugar to add to the dough, plain if there wasn't. Sometimes they'd get dusted with sugar after frying, sometimes just eaten as they were. Either way, they represented something important. They represented the human need for celebration, for marking moments, for saying that life was more than just work and sleep and survival, that there was still room for joy. Making these strips was labor-intensive, rolling dough, cutting strips, standing over hot oil in already warm kitchens, but nobody complained. Because the work of celebration is different from the work of survival. It fills a different need. It feeds a different hunger. And in those moments, watching children fight over warm fried dough, watching grandmothers smile, watching the community gather, the work felt like something other than burden. It felt like life, real life, the kind worth living. 25 Sweetened wheat porridge for children. There's a specific moment that every immigrant family remembers, the moment when things started to feel stable, when the constant panic of survival eased just enough to breathe, when you could think beyond today and tomorrow, when you could start making food that was about more than just filling stomachs. Sweetened wheat porridge for children marked that moment. It was one of the first soft foods families made when they weren't just surviving anymore, when there was enough money for a little honey or sugar, when there was time to cook something gentle just for the children. You'd cook wheat until it was very soft, much softer than you'd cook it for adults. Cook it long and slow until the grains broke down and the porridge became almost creamy. Then you'd stir in sweetness. Not much, just enough to make it taste like care. Like someone had time to make something special just for you. Mothers would cool the porridge to exactly the right temperature. Not too hot, not cold, just warm enough to be comforting. They'd spoon it into bowls and watch their children eat. Really watch them. Not just making sure they ate, but enjoying the fact that they could give their children something soft and sweet. This porridge represented a threshold, a crossing from one kind of life to another, from desperate survival to something approaching normal. Children who'd grown up eating whatever was available now had food made specifically for them, with their needs in mind, their comfort considered. For mothers, making this porridge was emotional. It meant they could finally start being mothers instead of just survival machines. They could nourish instead of just feed, care instead of just provide. The porridge tasted like hope, like the future, like maybe their children would grow up with enough, with softness, with sweetness. 26 Toasted bulgur crumbs with hot water and salt. There are levels of scarcity. And then there's the level where even basic cooking isn't possible. When fuel is too expensive, when time is too precious, when exhaustion is so complete that even the simplest meal preparation feels impossible. Toasted bulgur crumbs with hot water and salt was food for those moments. The absolute bottom. The last resort before having nothing at all. You'd toast dry bulgur in a pan. No oil. Just dry grain and heat. The bulgur would turn golden and smell nutty. That toasting was crucial. It made the difference between edible and inedible, between something that tasted like food and something that tasted like desperation. Once toasted, you'd pour the bulgur into a bowl, pour boiling water over it, add salt. Wait a few minutes while the bulgur softened just enough to chew. Then eat it, quickly, before you could think too much about what you were eating. This wasn't food you lingered over. This was fuel, calories, the bare minimum to keep working, keep moving, keep breathing. Factory workers ate this during night shifts when there was no time for real meals. Day laborers ate it between jobs. People working multiple shifts with no break ate it standing up. Nobody talked while eating this. Nobody made conversation. You just ate and moved on. This food represented rock bottom, but it also represented something else. The absolute refusal to give up. The determination to keep going even when circumstances were brutal. Even when there was barely anything to eat. Even when every day felt like too much. You ate toasted bulgur with hot water, and you survived, and the next day you did it again. Because the alternative was unthinkable, and these families didn't cross oceans and survive horrors just to give up over something like food. 27. Onion boiled water with oil swirl. There's a kind of poverty that's hard to explain to people who haven't lived it. The kind where you look at what you have and realize there's almost nothing. No grains, no beans, no bread, just onions, just water, just a few drops of oil. And you have to figure out how to turn that into something, how to make a meal from ingredients that barely qualify as food. Onion boiled water with oil swirl was the answer to that impossible question. You'd slice onions, put them in a pot of water, boil them until the water tasted like something, until the onions released their sweetness and the water transformed from plain to flavored. Then you'd remove it from heat and swirl in a few drops of oil, maybe 3 drops, maybe 5. Not enough to be substantial, but enough to create swirls on the surface, enough to add the smallest amount of richness. That was it. That was the meal. Onion water with oil swirls. You'd drink it from bowls or cups, hot. The warmth was important. It made it feel more like real food, made it fill your stomach in a way cold water never could. The onion flavor gave your mouth something to taste, something to focus on besides hunger. The oil provided the tiniest amount of fat, enough to trick your body into thinking it had eaten something substantial. This wasn't food anyone would choose to eat. This was food you ate when choosing wasn't an option, when it was this or nothing, when even grains were limited, when the money had run out days before payday, when illness or injury had stopped someone from working and income disappeared. These were the worst days, the days that tested everything, that made people question whether they'd made the right choice coming to America, whether survival was worth this much suffering. But they drank the onion water, they fed it to their children, and they made it to the next day. And that's what mattered. 28. Crushed wheat and raisin mash. Energy. That's what this food was about. Pure, concentrated energy for bodies being pushed beyond their limits, for children growing despite not having enough, for laborers working shifts that would horrify modern people, for mothers doing 3 people's work with 1 person's strength. Crushed wheat and raisin mash was fuel for survival, made from cracked wheat, cooked soft, mixed with raisins that had been stored. The raisins provided quick sugar, immediate energy that hit your bloodstream fast. The wheat provided sustained energy, calories that lasted. Together they created something powerful. This mash appeared in the morning before brutal workdays. Before shifts in factories where the heat was overwhelming and the pace was relentless. Before construction days where men hauled materials up scaffolding without safety equipment. Before days when children as young as 12 worked alongside adults because family survival demanded it. Mothers would pack this mash in tin containers. Workers would eat it cold during the brief moments they could stop. The sweetness from the raisins made it easier to eat quickly, made it feel less like medicine and more like food. Children got bigger portions because growing bodies needed more, because everyone understood that the children were the future. That survival today meant giving the next generation enough to become strong. This mash was evidence of hard truths. That immigrant labor built cities, built industries, built wealth for others while barely surviving themselves. That bodies were used up in service of progress. That survival required sacrifices modern people can barely imagine. Every bite of wheat and raisin mash was proof that people will do extraordinary things to keep their families alive. They'll work until their bodies break. They'll eat food designed only for fuel. They'll endure conditions that should have killed them. And they'll keep going. Because what else is there to do? 29 pan-warmed flatbread with grape molasses smear. Hope tastes like sweetness. Like the moment when you realize that maybe you're going to make it. Maybe the worst is behind you. Maybe things are starting to get better. Pan-warmed flatbread with grape molasses smear was that taste of hope. Made from flatbread that had gone stale, that would have been tough and hard to eat, but you'd warm it on a hot pan, watch it soften slightly, revive just enough to become edible again. Then you'd brush it with diluted grape molasses. Grape molasses was precious, sweet, a luxury that appeared only when there was a little extra money, a little extra time, a little extra everything. It came from the old country, from traditions of preserving grapes into thick, sweet syrup. Some families brought small jars with them. Others saved for months to buy a jar from specialty shops. The molasses would be diluted with water to make it stretch. To make one jar last as long as possible, a small amount brushed on warm bread transformed it completely, made it taste like celebration, like abundance, like life was getting better. Children would beg for this bread, would watch the pan, hopefully, waiting for their piece. Adults would eat it slowly, savoring every bite, remembering sweeter times. This bread appeared on good days, days when paychecks arrived, days when someone got promoted or got a better job, days when the family could gather without the weight of immediate survival crushing down. It was morale food, food that fed something beyond just the body, that fed the spirit, the determination to keep going. Because survival isn't just physical, it's mental, emotional, spiritual. And sometimes the thing that keeps you surviving is the reminder that sweetness still exists, that life can still be good, that you're making progress. Pan-warmed flatbread with grape molasses was that reminder. Simple, precious, proof that things were moving in the right direction. 30. Foraged herb and Bulgur scald bowl, the last recipe, the most resourceful one. The one that proves that survival isn't about what you have stored. It's about what you can find, what you can create from nothing. Foraged herb and Bulgur scald bowl was food for the days when storage wasn't an option, when you couldn't keep food around, when today's meal had to come from today's efforts, nothing saved, nothing kept, just immediate survival. You'd go out early, before work if possible, to empty lots, parks, anywhere green things grew. You'd look for wild herbs, things others walked past without seeing. Dandelion, wild sorrel, chickweed, lamb's quarters, things that grew without anyone planting them, things that asked for nothing but gave food to those who knew how to look. You'd gather them carefully, fill a bag or your pockets, bring them home, wash them thoroughly because city plants came with city dirt. Then you'd scald them briefly in boiling water, just enough to make them tender, make them safe to eat. You'd mix them immediately with bulgur, eat the whole thing right away. No storing, no saving, just immediate consumption because there was no guarantee of tomorrow's meal. This bowl represented the absolute edge of survival, the place where resourcefulness meant the difference between eating and not eating, where knowledge of wild plants saved lives, where the ability to see food where others saw weeds made survival possible. Families who ate this bowl were living day to day, meal to meal, with no buffer, no safety net, no savings of any kind, just the daily challenge of finding food and eating it and surviving until the next day when the challenge would start again. But here's what's important. They survived. These families eating foraged herbs with bulgur. They made it. They endured. They pushed through. Their children grew up, got educations, built careers, became doctors, lawyers, teachers, business owners. The grandchildren of people who ate foraged herbs now live comfortable lives. They own homes, have choices, experience abundance. And somewhere in the back of their family history is this recipe, this bowl of scalded herbs and bulgur. Proof of where they came from, proof of what their ancestors endured, proof of the price that was paid for the lives they now live. These 30 recipes aren't just food, they're proof that people can rebuild, that families can start over, that even when everything is taken from you, you can still make something that feeds the people you love. Armenian immigrant families didn't have fancy kitchens, they didn't have cookbooks, they didn't have much at all. But they had each other, and they had food that whispered, "You're going to make it." And they did. If your family has recipes like these, simple, humble, powerful, share them in the comments. Let's remember the meals that helped people start over. Because those recipes, they're the ones that really matter.